The galaxy was an endless sprawl of empires, fleets, and hierarchies. Species measured dominance not only in weapons but in the lives they could afford to expend. In such a theater of constant conflict, expendability had become a virtue. Armies of client races filled the ranks of greater powers. Bodies hurled into battles that mattered little to them. And in this relentless churn of subjugation and war, one empire believed it had discovered a new resource. They had found Earth. To the Croft Consortium, the human species was unremarkable at first glance. Their weapons were primitive, their history blood-soaked, their societies fractured and endlessly squabbling. But that very nature, endless conflict, ceaseless adaptation, survival against their own kind, marked them as perfect for use. The Consortium saw them as the ideal raw material for soldiers. They had conquered other species and bent them into regiments before, but humans seemed different. Something about their restless energy made them a tantalizing gamble. The expectation was simple: capture them, train them, and shape them into soldiers for wars far larger than their own petty history. The harvest was not gentle. Shuttles descended, cities fell, and humans were taken. They fought, of course, because humans always fought, but the Consortium did not waste time with extermination. They did not want corpses. They wanted recruits. Those who resisted hardest were tranquilized and transported. Those who surrendered were collared and shackled. From the moment the first cages closed, the Croft believed they had gained another asset to be slotted neatly into their endless machine. What they had not accounted for was how quickly humans adjusted to captivity, not in the sense of obedience. Far from it, but in their uncanny ability to measure their surroundings, to test boundaries, to probe weaknesses. The Consortium had domesticated dozens of species before. Each one had broken in predictable patterns: despair, resignation, compliance. Humans did none of these. They seethed. They whispered. They laughed at their captors in ways that made no sense to those who heard it. And above all, they adapted to the alien environment faster than seemed possible. The training facilities were engineered to intimidate. Cavernous halls of steel and light, monitored constantly by drones, overseen by officers bred to command fear. Here, the captives were drilled, fed rations laced with compliance serums, marched through exercises that had broken stronger species. But the humans did not yield. The serums barely dulled their fire, and instead of being cowed, they turned the training into contests. Who could carry more weight? Who could endure longer without food? Who could suffer the lash without breaking? The aliens had designed punishments to instill obedience, but among humans those punishments became another game, another challenge, another story to brag about. Their humor was unnerving. One human, lashed until his back was slick with blood, had turned his head and asked the overseer if he needed practice to swing harder. Another, half-starved, shared his ration with companion, and declared it was the finest feast he'd ever had. To the Croft, this behavior was deranged. It was not how captives were meant to behave, but they mistook it for bravado, a thin shell that would eventually crumble. They thought time would wear it down. Time only hardened it. When ordered into sparring pits, humans did not fight as soldiers. They did not follow forms. They fought like predators. Nails, teeth, improvised holds. Strikes meant to cripple rather than win honor. They discovered weaknesses in their alien instructors quickly, and once discovered, they never forgot. One alien lost an eye to a human's thumb. Another never walked correctly again after a human twisted its leg in the wrong direction. These were not accidents. They were deliberate acts of feral cunning. The Consortium recorded these behaviors carefully. Their analysts noted that while humans lacked discipline, they compensated with unpredictability. The concern was raised that such recruits would be difficult to control on the battlefield, but the decision-makers dismissed it. Control was secondary. Expendability was what mattered, and the humans, reckless and savage, seemed almost designed to be thrown into the grinder. Their resilience was remarkable, their adaptability frightening. What commander would not want a disposable force that learned faster than the enemy could counter? Among themselves, humans did not crumble. They grew stronger. Shared hardship bound them tightly, and their whispered conversations became a culture of defiance. They laughed at pain, mocked death, and shared survival stories so extreme the aliens could not distinguish exaggeration from truth. To grow up on a planet where storms could erase cities, where predators hunted humans as prey, where disease could scourge populations, that was their baseline. In comparison, alien cages were tolerable. Harsh, yes, but survivable. Nothing compared to home. The death world that had shaped them. The aliens failed to see that Earth had bred not just survivors, but predators of the highest order. Every human carried with them instincts honed over millennia of war, famine, disaster, and conquest. The Croft thought they were training soldiers, but what they had gathered were wolves dressed as prey. When the time came to evaluate their progress, the consortium commanders expected obedient regiments. What they found instead were humans who grinned at the prospect of real combat, who sharpened scraps of metal into hidden blades, who had turned drills into contests of dominance. They were not soldiers. They were lunatics, apex predators in chains, waiting for the leash to snap. The aliens pressed forward anyway. They had invested resources. They had harvested thousands. They would not discard such an asset lightly. If the humans were wild, so be it. Wildness could be useful in battle. The mistake, fatal and inevitable, was believing they could control the direction of that wildness. As the first deployment orders circulated, humans were herded into transports, armed with weapons designed for lesser species, collared with devices meant to shock them into obedience if they disobeyed. But already the humans were testing those collars, studying them, joking about how long it might take to short them out. None of this was hidden. They made no effort to disguise their intentions. The arrogance of the consortium blinded them. They thought humans incapable of true defiance under their gaze. They were about to learn how wrong they were. Among the officers, unease spread. Some had seen firsthand how these creatures behaved when cornered. They had watched them kill without hesitation, watched them endure torment with laughter. But unease was not enough to override orders. The humans would be deployed. They would fight, and they would die in the service of the consortium. That was the expectation. That was the calculation. And that was the beginning of the mistake. The transports descended onto a world scarred by war, its surface cratered and scorched from years of conflict between rival empires. The humans were marched down the ramps with collars glowing faintly around their necks, weapons shoved into their hands by overseers who expected them to serve as little more than cannon fodder. The plan was simple. Throw them at the front lines against an entrenched enemy and let attrition work its course. The consortium commanders assumed the humans would either break or bleed enough to soften enemy defenses. But the humans did not walk like doomed conscripts. They moved with an eager hunger, scanning the battlefield with eyes that drank in every detail. The alien soldiers nearby gave them wary glances. They had seen client races before, herds of trembling captives pushed into slaughter, but these humans carried themselves differently. Their postures were loose, shoulders rolling as though they were hunters preparing for a chase. Some grinned, some hummed to themselves. One spat into the dirt and laughed at the taste of ash in the air. It unnerved everyone who watched. When the first engagement began, the aliens expected chaos. They expected humans to die in droves, confused by advanced weapons and alien terrain. And yes, casualties came, but not in the way predicted. The humans surged forward not with discipline, but with feral cunning. They darted into cover, used terrain like instinct, rolled under plasma fire instead of cowering behind shields. They did not form neat firing lines. They did not obey shouted orders. Instead, they improvised. A squad of humans discovered that the enemy's energy projectiles overloaded a funnel through narrow rock fissures. So they baited volleys toward cliffs and brought whole sections of enemy cover crashing down. Another group tied rations and scraps of fabric to drone hulls, sending them buzzing into enemy trenches as distractions before storming them with blades stolen from fallen foes. They did not fight like soldiers at all. They fought like predators playing with prey. The consortium overseers were horrified. This was not the clean attrition they had anticipated. The humans were not dying meekly. They were turning the battlefield into a nightmare. They screamed war cries that echoed across the terrain, laughed in the face of incoming fire, and charged with an abandon that made even hardened veterans hesitate. Where discipline should have created order, chaos instead became a weapon. Enemy forces, unfamiliar with such behavior, faltered. Their doctrines were built on predictability, on facing troops who obeyed patterns and formations. The humans shredded those assumptions. They attacked at odd angles, feigned retreats only to circle back and strike from behind, tore through lines with savagery that seemed more animal than sapient. And when they captured enemy soldiers, they did not simply kill them. They used them, stripping weapons, testing equipment, prying information with methods so brutal even their captors recoiled. The consortium commanders watching the feed could not believe what they saw. These were supposed to be raw recruits, barely trained primitives, yet they moved with a predatory instinct that no amount of drilling could replicate. They should have been casualties, yet they were turning into victors. And worse, they were enjoying themselves. Between battles, the humans did not rest like others. They laughed, swapped stories, turned wounds into jokes, and sang strange songs in low voices that unsettled anyone who overheard. They patched each other with scraps, shared food without hesitation, and mocked their overseers openly. To the consortium, this was madness. Soldiers were meant to obey, not mock, not thrive in chaos. But the humans thrived nonetheless. The more they fought, the more they learned. Weapons that should have taken weeks to master became tools of instinct. They disassembled rifles, reconfigured them, tested them in ways the designers had never intended. One squad modified a plasma projector into a makeshift cannon by overloading its core, detonating it in a blast that annihilated an entire ridge. It was suicidal, reckless, and devastatingly effective. The alien commanders tried to rein them in, but the humans only smiled and asked if their masters were afraid of winning too quickly. As engagements grew bloodier, the true horror revealed itself, not in human losses, but in their resilience. Wounds that would cripple other species barely slowed them. A human shot through the leg, tied it off, and dragged himself forward, laughing through gritted teeth as he fired with one arm. Another, burned across half his body, refused evacuation, insisting he could still bite an enemy's throat if nothing else. Their stubborn refusal to quit was alien in itself. To the consortium, this was not bravery. It was lunacy. To humans, it was simply normal. Enemy commanders began reporting nightmares. Their troops spoke of shadows in the smoke, of creatures that screamed with joy as they killed, of enemies that refused to fall even when riddled with holes. Stories spread quickly in war, and soon the humans were not merely soldiers. They were phantoms. Deathworld predators whispered about in trenches. Fear did more damage than weapons ever could. But with every victory came unease among their masters. The humans were not controllable. They ignored orders, rewired their collars, mocked their overseers openly. Shock devices meant to enforce obedience became toys. Humans learned to time the jolts, to grit their teeth through the pain, to carry on fighting even while their bodies convulsed. Punishment lost meaning. Nothing instilled fear in them, because fear had long been a companion they had mastered back on Earth. The consortium began to realize what they had unleashed. These were not soldiers that could be commanded. They were apex predators in borrowed armor, unleashed upon a galaxy unprepared for their ferocity. And worst of all, the humans seemed to grow stronger the more chaos surrounded them. Where other species broke under prolonged stress, humans only sharpened. The longer the war dragged on, the more terrifying they became. The alien officers whispered warnings, but higher command dismissed them. Losses were acceptable. Victory was being achieved. Humans were doing what was required, spilling blood, breaking lines, driving fear. So what if they were uncontrollable? They were still useful. That was the logic. That was the rationalization. But deep beneath that veneer of control, the seed of fear had been planted. The consortium believed they still held the leash. The collars glowed. The orders were broadcast. The assumption of control lingered in every command issued. But the truth had already shifted. The humans no longer listened because they had never truly listened at all. They had watched, they had learned, and they had waited. On the battlefields they were unleashed upon. They had not only fought the enemy, but tested the limits of their master's reach. Each engagement revealed more. How far signals carried, how long collars held charge, how swiftly overseers could respond. Every fight was not just a clash against foes, but an experiment. The humans were not just killing, they were gathering data. It became undeniable the moment a platoon of humans disappeared from the front and reappeared 3 days later with weapons stolen from both sides, wounds half-treated, and a captured transport they had somehow forced into operation. They were meant to be disposable, yet they returned more dangerous than when they had left. The consortium tried to punish them. They activated every collar, turned up the shock to levels that would kill lesser species. The humans writhed, screamed, and fell, but not all. Some dragged themselves upright, staggering through pain that should have ended them. One laughed through broken teeth and shouted that it tickled. Another tore the collar off his own neck with fingers burned to bone. The punishment had failed. Fear had failed. So the decision was made in the upper chambers. Purge them. Humanity had been a failed experiment, too volatile, too dangerous. Better to erase them before they infected anything else. Orders were passed down to commanders, fleets adjusted, and arrangements were made to gather the humans for termination under the guise of redeployment. But the humans were already a step ahead. They had seen the looks in their overseers' eyes. They recognized the same calculation they had witnessed in their own history, the moment when power decides utility is ended and extermination is cheaper than containment. Humans had written that lesson into their bones long before they ever touched the stars. They would not wait for slaughter. The uprising did not begin with speeches or banners. It began with silence. Units of humans moved through camps as though preparing for another mission. They laughed and joked as usual, mocked their overseers, kept up the facade. But beneath that mask, they exchanged stolen parts, shared hand-sketched maps, spread instructions in whispers. The guards saw nothing unusual. By then, they had become numb to human strangeness. That was a mistake. When the strike came, it was sudden, brutal, and perfectly timed. Collars shorted simultaneously, jury-rigged with smuggled power cells. Overseers expecting compliance were met with blades fashioned from scavenged plating. Firearms turned on them at point-blank range. Drones fell from the sky as humans tore into their guts with bare hands, ripping circuits free. Barracks erupted into chaos, but not disorder. Every human moved with purpose. Each strike coordinated through signals too subtle for alien eyes to register. Glances, gestures, an unspoken understanding born from millennia of surviving together in hostile environments. The consortium camp was not overrun in hours. It was overrun in minutes. By the time higher command realized what had happened, entire regiments of humans had vanished into the wilderness, armed and armored with whatever they could seize. And worse, they had taken ships. Not warships, not yet, but transports, supply craft, small vessels whose systems they should not have been able to comprehend. Yet somehow, within hours, those ships were flying under human command. The galaxy had long believed that its technology was too complex for primitives to master without years of instruction. The humans shredded that assumption with a single act. They pressed buttons, flipped switches, rewired panels with reckless experimentation. If something broke, they fixed it with improvisation bordering on madness. If something exploded, they learned from the shrapnel. Trial and error was not a barrier. It was a fuel, where others required manuals. Humans used instinct, and instinct, sharpened by desperation, was enough. The first commandeered transport did not flee into the void. It turned its stolen guns on its former masters. Plasma cannons ripped through hangars, detonating stockpiles and scattering fleets that should have crushed them. By the time reinforcements arrived, the humans had already leapt to another system, dragging their captured ships with them like wolves absconding with prey. The hunt had begun. Across consortium space, panic rippled. What had been expendable fodder was now a contagion. Human units vanished from assignments. Entire camps fell silent, and fleets found themselves ambushed by ships that should have been lost. At first, the consortium dismissed it as isolated failures. Then came the rumors. Tales spread by fleeing soldiers of humans who laugh while burning alive, of predators who sabotage reactors with their bare hands, of stolen starships flying under no flag, but marked with crude emblems daubed in blood. Rumors gave way to fear, and fear gave way to paralysis. The humans were no longer soldiers. They had never been soldiers. They were predators unleashed into a galaxy that had mistaken them for livestock. And now, With every weapon they seized, with every ship they mastered, they grew bolder,